On Thursday, the 27th of December in 2018, a 35-year-old mother of two named Nahendra Davis had plans to celebrate her birthday, but just hours after dropping her kids off at her mother's house in Baton Rouge, Nahendra would mysteriously vanish without a trace and hasn't been seen since. A few days later, her white Dodge Challenger was found abandoned on the side of a highway, with her purse, keys and cash still inside. But surprisingly, after inspecting the vehicle, investigators saw no signs of foul play, resulting in her case being treated like just another missing adult who had simply walked away from their responsibilities. However, for those who knew Nahendra, this couldn't have been further from the truth, as she never would have left her children behind and she had no reason to leave. But as time went on, the silence surrounding her disappearance would only grow more suspicious. Nahendra had gone missing in the controversial city of Baton Rouge, a location well known for its affiliation with criminal activities, where at the time women of colour were disappearing at alarming rates. So, given the connections to human trafficking, many began to question whether Nahendra's case could have been another tragic chapter in that ongoing nightmare. However, despite the increased efforts of the public to help spread awareness, nearly 7 years on from the day she disappeared, her family are still searching for answers, as they are only left to wonder what really happened to Nahendra Davis, and how many more women need to vanish in Baton Rouge before the police finally start paying attention. Nahendra Faye Davis was born on the 27th of December in 1983, where she was raised by her parents in the quiet suburb of Baker, Louisiana, a small city just north of Baton Rouge. She grew up surrounded by a close-knit family who described her as loving, dependable, and above all else, deeply devoted to her children. To those who knew her, Nahendra, or Ninny as she was affectionately nicknamed, was the kind of person who would go out of her way to help others, even when she had little of her own to give. She was known for her bright smile, her warm heart, and her fierce love for her two kids, who she raised with strength and dedication. According to her mother, Miranda, Nahendra was the kind of daughter every parent hopes for, responsible, respectful, and deeply rooted in her values. She worked hard to provide for her family and made it a point to never stray too far from the people she cared about. While life wasn't always easy, she handled its challenges with resilience, always putting her children's well-being first and ensuring that they were brought up in a happy home filled with love. And this was the same in 2018, when she spent Christmas with her family and had plans to celebrate her birthday shortly after, as well as enjoying the rest of the holiday period with her children. However, unbeknownst to her family, this would be the last time they would ever see their loved one, as it wouldn't be long before she would mysteriously disappear on that fateful day in 2018. On Thursday, the 27th of December, a day which also happened to be her 35th birthday, Nahendra Davis spent part of her afternoon dropping off her children at her mother's house in Baton Rouge. It was just after 4:45 PM when she said goodbye to her kids, promising she'd be back soon. But what no one realised at the time was that this would be the last moment anyone would ever see her again. Her mother, Miranda, wasn't immediately alarmed. After all, Nahendra was an adult, and it wasn't unusual for her to run errands or visit friends. But as the hours passed, with no messages, no calls, and no updates, that usual sense of calm quickly gave way to dread. Even when Nahendra needed space, she never stayed silent, especially not when her children were involved. So concerned for her safety, her family began reaching out, trying to get a hold of her cell phone. But unfortunately, the calls went unanswered, and her messages were also left unresponsive. By the following day, there was still no word from her, and by now, her mother knew in her gut that something wasn't right. So it was at this point she realised that there was no other option but to officially report Nahendra as missing to the local police. On Friday the 28th of December, the Baker Police Department would receive a call from a concerned family member who was worried about the well-being of their loved one. During the phone call, Nahendra's family expressed how she wasn't the type to just vanish, at least not without telling anyone. But the situation would quickly escalate further, when just a few days later, Nahendra's white 2015 Dodge Challenger was found abandoned near the 6900 block of Scenic Highway, not far from 72nd Avenue. It was just sitting there, unlocked, with her belongings still inside, including her purse, her ID, and even a small amount of cash. But surprisingly, there were no signs of Nahendra herself, and more disturbingly, there were no signs of a struggle either. Police arrived on the scene and conducted a brief search, but with no immediate evidence of foul play, her disappearance didn't receive the urgency her family believed it deserved. They were told she might have just left on her own, as maybe she needed a break, and that she'd possibly be back in a few days. But as the days turned into weeks, and weeks turned into months, that explanation became impossible to accept. So desperate for answers, her family began doing their own outreach, sharing flyers, knocking on doors, and following up on every single rumour they could. Some claimed they saw her around the local town, whilst others said that she had been spotted with a man. But time and time again, those tips would lead nowhere, as they were either a case of mistaken identity or cruel attempts to exploit a grieving family. So the only thing that became clear was that Nahendra had vanished, and nobody seemed to be looking for her except her family. During this time, the investigation was incredibly slow, with no clear crime scene and no concrete leads, eventually causing her case to fall through the cracks. However, just as it seemed that hope would be completely lost, there would be another update to the case that would hopefully change everything. On Thursday the 16th of May, around 5 months on from her disappearance, Nahendra's mother Miranda continued to speak out publicly, urging local authorities and the public to not forget her daughter. During an interview with WBRZ News, she shared Nahendra's story, where it was emphasised how deeply out of character it would have been for her daughter to simply walk away from her children, especially without contacting anyone. She stated she dropped off her kids and said she was going to the store. That's not something you do and never come back from. In that same report, Miranda also expressed frustration over the lack of media coverage and investigative urgency, echoing concerns that are all too common in cases involving missing black women. She stated that she had repeatedly contacted authorities, distributed flyers on her own, and even searched abandoned properties in Baton Rouge in hopes of finding any clue about her daughter's whereabouts. However, despite her enormous efforts to keep the case alive, over 6 years on from Nahendra's disappearance, she still remains missing. No suspects have been officially named, and no arrests have been made. So, although her case still technically remains open, it would seem that it has come to a complete stop as far as the investigators are concerned. But for her family, they refuse to let go of hope, as they continue to pray that they will one day get the answers that they've been waiting so desperately for. Now, unfortunately, as far as the official investigation goes, this is all we know for now. But thanks to the unwavering determination of Nahendra's family, particularly her mother Miranda, her case continues to stay alive in the public eye, with loved ones consistently raising awareness through social media, public interviews, and community outreach efforts. They've never stopped searching or asking questions, and they will never stop believing that someone somewhere knows what happened to her. So with this in mind, we have to remain hopeful that it will only be a matter of time before the truth finally comes to light, bringing Nahendra's family the answers they deserve, and maybe even leading them to reunite with their loved one against all odds. However, given that Nahendra Davis has now been missing for over 6 years, despite all the tireless efforts from those who love her, it's hard not to acknowledge the heartbreaking reality that the chances of a safe return grow slimmer with each passing day. So with that, let's get into some of the potential theories. Now, just before I get into the theories themselves, I first wanted to draw some attention to what I believe is a great injustice in this case. The fact is, we are talking about a missing woman who has children that are growing up without their mother, and yet it would seem that the police have been disinterested from the start. As far as I can tell from my research, following on from Nahendra Davis's disappearance in 2018, the Baker Police Department were able to locate her abandoned vehicle in Baton Rouge, but whilst working in collaboration with the Baton Rouge police, no signs of foul play were ever discovered. It is true that investigators reviewed security footage and interviewed witnesses, however, once again, these efforts did not yield any substantial leads, and tips received about potential sightings continuously turned out to be cases of mistaken identity. But to make matters even worse, after these initial efforts, it would seem that her case just fell off the map, with the police failing to find any new evidence after almost 7 years of investigating. Nahendra's information was entered into local and national missing person databases, but that is where their efforts stopped, and Nahendra's family were left to continue spreading awareness themselves. I understand there are many other cases out there that require the attention of the police, but I can't help but feel that if more effort had been put in from the start, that this case would have been solved by now, and the guilty suspects would be off the streets and in prison where they belong. Instead, we have yet another case of a missing woman of colour who has disappeared from Baton Rouge, a city well known for its affiliation with human trafficking, as well as other criminal activities, and the police do not seem to be taking this epidemic seriously enough. According to the Black and Missing Foundation, over 97,000 black women were reported missing in the United States in 2022 alone, accounting for approximately 18% of all missing person cases, despite the fact that black women only make up around 7% of the US population. This disparity is further compounded by systematic issues, such as underreporting, misclassification, and a lack of media coverage, often referred to as missing white woman syndrome. So it cannot be ignored that these factors may have contributed to the challenges in accurately tracking and addressing the cases of missing black women, both nationally and in specific locations like Baton Rouge. But getting back to the specific case at hand, I have no doubts that these same issues will have contributed to the lack of media attention that Nahendra received, and I believe that if these racial biases didn't exist, then this case would have been solved many years ago. However, from what we do know about Nahendra's case, what kind of conclusions can we actually draw? And how do we explain her strange disappearance in the first place? Well, in the days following her disappearance, there were whispers circulating around the Baton Rouge area that Nahendra may not have vanished by choice, but rather that she may have fallen victim to something far more sinister. One of the earliest and most persistent theories is that foul play was involved, particularly due to the circumstances surrounding the discovery of her abandoned vehicle. As previously mentioned, Nahendra's white Dodge Challenger was found on scenic highway less than 24 hours after she was last seen. But what stood out to her family immediately was the fact that her purse, keys and cash were still inside, and the car doors were reportedly unlocked as well. Now, considering Nahendra had just dropped off her children and told her mother she was going to the store, the idea that she would simply walk away from her car with all of her belongings inside made absolutely no sense. Her family also emphasised how deeply committed she was to her kids, which further supports the idea that something or someone stopped her from coming back. Some local residents speculated that she may have been targeted by someone she knew, perhaps even someone she trusted. The location where her vehicle was recovered is also notable, as it's an industrial stretch of road known to be frequented by drug activity and, in some accounts, trafficking operations. Despite these red flags, however, no official persons of interest were ever publicly named by the police, and no detailed search of the surrounding area was ever reported, at least from what I can see online. To make matters worse, according to her family, police processed the vehicle but didn't treat it as a crime scene, and there has been no indication that forensic analysis was conducted in depth. No fingerprints, no DNA, nothing. This has led some advocates to question whether her case could have been handled differently had she been from a different demographic. Now, to be absolutely clear, none of this information has been officially confirmed by law enforcement, and there are no public records tying specific individuals to Nahendra's disappearance, with no evidence ever being released to the public proving foul play. But what I will say is that when a woman disappears under highly unusual circumstances, leaves behind everything she owns, and the investigation goes cold within weeks, that in itself should be enough to raise suspicion. If there's even a chance that someone out there knows what really happened to Nahendra Davis, and that the truth has been buried by fear, neglect, or indifference, then it's not just a mystery, it's a tragedy, and one that desperately needs answers. So, what other possible reasons could explain how she could have disappeared without a trace? Well, although there's no publicly confirmed evidence to support this next theory, there is something about Nahendra's case that many locals and advocates have found difficult to ignore. and that is the possibility that she may have been the victim of human trafficking. Baton Rouge is no stranger to the horrors of trafficking. In fact, Louisiana as a whole has one of the highest rates of human trafficking cases per capita in the United States, and Baton Rouge in particular has long been identified as a hotspot due to its positioning along major interstate highways like Interstate 10 and 12, which traffickers often use to move victims between cities and states. Now, taking a closer look at the facts, Nahendra disappeared after dropping her children off at her mother's house in the middle of the day, and according to family members, she said she was just going to the store, yet somehow she never returned. And hours later, her car was found abandoned in a part of town known for its high crime rate, and as previously mentioned, her belongings were left behind. So if this was a planned disappearance, why leave everything? And if it was just a random act of violence, why has no physical evidence ever been uncovered? So it's no surprise that some advocates believe that these are the exact kind of conditions that point to trafficking. Sudden disappearances, no signs of a struggle, and no digital trail. These are all consistent with abduction for the purposes of human trafficking. There were even unconfirmed rumours at the time that Nahendra may have been seen with a man in the days leading up to her disappearance, though none of those sightings were ever substantiated by the police. But what makes this even more chilling is that many other young black women have disappeared from Baton Rouge under similarly vague circumstances, and time after time their cases go cold without any resolution. It's led some members of the community to believe that a trafficking ring could be operating in plain sight, and that Nahendra may have been one of the many victims. But once again, to be completely fair, the police have never publicly linked her case to human trafficking, and there is no confirmed evidence proving that this was what happened to her. However, at the same time, the lack of answers combined with the high trafficking activity in the region leaves this theory feeling far too possible to ignore. And to take things a step further, if Nahendra really was taken for the purposes of trafficking, then it's possible that she may still be alive. So with this in mind, we need to do everything we can to help keep her case in the spotlight, in the hopes that we can help reunite Nahendra with her family, or at the very least, get them the closure that they have been waiting for. Anyway, on that note, I think I'll leave this video here. But as always, if you have any other theories of your own which you think may help explain what really happened to Nahendra Davis, please leave your ideas in the comments down below and I'll do my best to get back to you. But until next time, thank you so much for watching, and make sure to subscribe to the channel for updates on these stories. Also, if you found this video interesting, feel free to check out the playlist on screen now, which covers the many other cases of women who continue to disappear across America, never to be seen alive again.